Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm here to help you achieve your fitness goals without pain. In each episode, I'll share tips and strategies that will help you stay safe and pain-free while you're working out. I'll also interview experts in the field of fitness and pain management. So if you're ready to learn how to stay active and pain-free, then subscribe to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones, and today I am joined by David Jarvis. David was once known as the unluckiest man in NATO after being medically discharged from the British Army following 20 years of service. While preparing for the Invictus Game, he was then diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, another life-changing challenge. Instead of stepping back, he adapted and went on to win gold. He is now a multi-award-winning para-athlete, keynote speaker, and true example of resilience in action. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're fellow veterans,
Mhm.
although you had a lot longer career. So I think the biggest thing for me is always like, how did you make that transition? Because I know for a very short period of time, the military was part of my existence, and then you did not have the end that you were hoping for. And so you got discharged. So how do you make that transition? Like, how does that work for you?
In a word, painfully. Yeah, it was, well, not to make too many bones about it. It was a real struggle, if I'm honest. I had no obvious plan. I mean, like you said there, I'd intended on staying in. We were expecting our second daughter. The idea was we would stay, my wife and I would stay in. We had already had one daughter who was 3 years old at the time, and we planned to stay in until my youngest was old enough to start full-time school. So you're talking, 5-6 years old. So the intent was to do the full 22 years, which is a typical British Army career, full career, I should say, and then extend and keep extending as much as needed to get my kids to that age. And then we would find our permanent anchor point, our permanent home, as it's such, if that makes sense. And hopefully then settle down and let the kids get their full education up until secondary school and so on in one place, rather than bouncing around the place like typical military do. And it just didn't pan out that way. It was a series of injuries over time that culminated in me basically becoming non-deployable, and bad as it sounds, unemployable.
Right.
And I didn't really think it's one of them situations where I knew it was possible, but I didn't really think it would happen to me, because it was a trade group, or wasn't a trade group, sorry. I was a communication engineer, and it was a trade group that was in short supply. There were positions around the army where I could have moved to. I know there were units that were kicking off because they needed people in, and it was a decision made by the medical board, and the employment board was not, two separate entities basically. And yeah, that was that. So when I was on my way out, I had no clue what I was going to do. I had no plan, no clear idea of what to do with the skills and experience I'd gained in the military. So I was clutching at every straw I could get my hands on with the idea that I needed to be able to provide for my family. So I was looking at taxi driving, box packing, shelf stacking in supermarkets, trying to line up my qualifications and what I'd got through the military. And it just so happened I happened to be in a Facebook job site for the northeast of Scotland, and a person who became a bit of a friend since happened to post us. I'd never come across him before, but he made a post up about opportunities that they were looking at. And I thought, well, why not? It looks like project management, looks like working in sort of IT and things of that nature. And I thought, okay, why not? Let's just stick my foot in the ring, so to speak, and see what happens. And it turned out that he was an ex-Royal Signal soldier as well. So a lucky break, you could say, because he knew exactly the trade I was in. He knew what skill sets we had and how it translated, and he knew straight away what kind of jobs to line me up for. So it turned out I ended up getting a job as a project manager with a consultancy company. Essentially, they pimp me out to different clients, and I take on technical projects. And it's turned out to be a really good job, to be fair, but it was a really lucky find through a random Facebook post right in the middle of various other struggles and dramas that were going on. So my daughter ended up coming a number of weeks early, my second daughter, sorry. And my wife went into labor, stage 1 labor, mid-November. Let me think. I'd got the discharge in the late summer, running like headless chicken, trying to get all the courses and all the learning to write CVs again, learning to do interview techniques, the vocational assessments, you name it, anything I could get my hands on while searching for jobs. Came across that little story I was telling you a minute ago about finding that ad and then reaching out to that chat. Got the job. thankfully, about the mid-November. And then my wife went in stage 1 labor. So all my resettlement activity had to cease because I had to go home and obviously take care of my eldest at the time. But my wife went in stage 1 labor and then decided to stay there for another 2 weeks. Emily wasn't ready to come straight out. So my wife had it probably the worst because she was getting contractions every 6 hours for 2 weeks straight. And then just to really rub salt in the wound, Storm Arwen, which was I think, as I understand it, it's one of the worst storms Northeast Scotland has seen in a couple of decades, is what I'm led to believe. 100-mile-plus-hour winds, all the stuff that comes with it. There's still woods and wooded areas in the area that's still recovering from it. And that was in 2021. That happened while she was in the hospital. And Stephanie, my wife, that's her name, she said she still remembers the hospital shaking from the storm. We're talking a big concrete building, because up here, Aberdeen, it's called Granite City for a reason, called the Granite Mine. So they're built solid buildings, properly built solid buildings. And she could feel it shaking while she's in there. And the funny line there is that we still don't know which one caused more chaos, the storm or Emily. So, yeah, that happened all in the midst of all that. And then I was out, my discharge date was the following month. So she finally got born on the 9th of December. So I think it was about 2.5 weeks she was in labor.
Wow.
Funny thing is that she went to stage 2 labor and it lasted for minutes. That was it. So if Emily finally wanted to make an appearance, it all just happened like that. But yeah, the next month, so January, I was out and I started the new role, and it was all the other things, the nif-naf and trivia of daily life that I had to get used to. So I'm figuring out how to pay all the bills, figuring out how to, register with the doctors, the dentists, how to find out where everything was in the local area, who to speak to, who to engage with. It was, when you're in a military base, all of that is very relatively easy to come by. You can just go and ask somebody, you can just speak to somebody, anyone in uniform. They'll all typically work as a team and help you and so on. There's that, that camaraderie, as I'm sure you know. But in Civvy Street in the new town, when you're a new face, people look at you as if to say, who's this tool coming in here? Can't just walk into the bar, into the mess and say, hey, can someone point me in the right direction? Where can I go and get some scran? They'll look at you like you're an idiot.
So when you get discharged, do they have any kind of training for the discharge? Because I know here sometimes there's some kind of prep for you to re-enter civilian life. Is there anything like that for you?
So typically what would normally happen, so medical discharge aside, a normal discharge period. So when you get to the 20-year mark, you'll start going into your resettlement period. So you'll get 2 years, and you'll get, over that 2-year period, you'll get things like job seekers leave. I think it's called job seeker leave or something like that. You'll get extra days of leave for that 2-year period to bolt onto your annual leave. You'll get an amount of funding to support training and qualifications directly linked to your resettlement. You will get guidance and training sessions that you can do, career progression. What is it called again? Career professional development or something like that, CPD, however that stands for, I forget now. But they where you get taught CV writing, interview techniques and vocational things like that. So that will take place over 2 years whilst you're doing your normal day job, and then the very last few months, maybe you'll take the last of your leave and you'll hand back all your kit and, all that jazz. With a medical discharge, the timeline is massively reduced. So you get a 6-month block from the point you get the decision. And at that 6-month point, that's when essentially you get the chop and you're done. That's it, you're out, irrelevant of whether you finished it all or not. And in that time period, you've got to basically clear from your unit. That means handing back everything. That means getting everything signed in and all that kind of stuff, finding your new accommodations, your new job, your all this kind of stuff. And in my case, and I suspect in a lot of cases in this situation, there's no clear plan. You don't know what you want to get out to do, because it's like you get the decision and then you've got to start trying to figure it out. And whilst you're trying to figure it out, you've then got to try and get the courses in and get the training in, get that CV writing stuff in and all that sort of jazz that comes with it, the interviews and so on. And whilst looking for accommodations and figuring out all this other stuff and,
and then having a child in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's 6 months can go really quickly when you're under pressure and when you don't know what you want to do or how you're going to do it. It's I think the real downside I found with having been in for so long is it's easy to ignore things. If your paycheck goes into your bank account and that's you, most of the bills have come off at source, so like your accommodation charges, your messing bills, your all that kind of stuff, it all comes out before it goes into your bank. So what you get is for you to go and pay for your phone and your car and the things that you want to have, the luxuries and all that kind of stuff, but once you're out, you've got to figure all of it out, and it was things like that I took for granted. So dare I say it, I was somewhat institutionalized, you know what I mean? You just get used to give
A
ignorantly.
convenience.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, you ignorantly giving your responsibilities to the military without really knowing it, and then when you get out, all of a sudden you've got to take full accountability for everything that's going on around you. Yeah, I mean, adding into the fact that my financial literacy at the time was completely up my ass. You know what I mean? Excuse my apologies, my French. It was not very good, shall we say? So
Yeah.
it was a lot of learning very quickly in a lot of different spaces, not just the job, but getting accreditations for some of my experiences and things like that to try and marry it all up. And there was lots of moving parts. It was a bit of a blur, if I'm perfectly honest, and it took me a long time to sort of find my feet again, if that makes sense. So yeah, my mental health took quite a pounding, if to be blunt about it. And without trying to skip too far forward in the story, the doctors think that is what caused the type 1 diabetes, because the stresses that I went through during that period, because there's a number of other factors and challenges that went into it. I mean, we could go down a number of different stories within that, from that medical discharge, but they think that did the damage to my autoimmune system, because typically type 1 is it's hereditary. It's passed on from parents to young kids. That's normally when it'll show itself, when people start seeing the symptoms. It's rare to get it later in life, and it's even rarer to get it when you don't have any direct lineage in it with it. So neither of my parents have got it, and I'm one of 5. I've got 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and I'm the only one with that. So beyond that, quite possibly, but the what I'm told is it's a direct parents that will typically have it, and it will, like I said, it's the kids or teenagers that will usually get it, or it'll start showing symptoms. And yeah, I just, that's, so the link is the doctors think that discharge period and the stresses I went through did the damage to my autoimmune system. And yeah, it just
Yeah.
decided that it goes into what's called the honeymoon period. So my pancreas, it got jump started into producing the insulin again. And you don't really notice until all of a sudden it just decides, that's it, you can have it, both barrels. So,
Yeah. No, that's an incredible story. One thing I do wanna pop in is let's hear it for the military spouses, because they are also institutionalized, but they do
yeah.
have a better understanding of how to navigate both worlds,
Mhm.
and so that is a big thing that
Yeah.
I hear from a lot of people, is that if it wasn't for their wife or their husband,
Mhm.
getting back would be a lot more difficult, just
Mhm.
because of the fact that everything's at your fingertips.
Absolutely.
And,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, so they do a lot of the heavy lifting, and
Mhm.
so just wanna make sure, because it's like, yeah, we have to acknowledge them.
Mhm.
So, how did the Invictus Games come into your life?
Well, just touching back on what you were just saying there, and then the Invictus Games, there is a video. It's on, which you can see on the Invictus Games channel itself and all that kind of stuff on YouTube. But I've got a clip of it on my channel as well, of the medal ceremony. And the point of that is you see my family and I, particularly my wife and I, having a really emotional moment after we got the medal and everything. And it was because Steph was kind of like she's the only person who saw everything that I went through and supported us by doing all the day-to-day stuff and everything as well. So it was really special to be able to share that with her, if that makes sense. Because we both got it, and which is what's over my shoulder at the minute. So it's nice that you brought that up right there and then ask about that games, because that's what it gave us. It gave us that opportunity to share something quite incredible. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, the world's media saw it and got it on camera. So Steph hates it, because you get a full HD view of what she calls her ugly crying face, and she doesn't like. So yeah, I've skipped ahead a little bit, but I just thought it quite poignant with you when you bringing that up as well, because you're absolutely right, and I completely agree. And yeah, we've been together for a long time now. We've known each other since 2009, and we've got 2 great kids as well. And I'm actually surprised you didn't hear them screaming, because it's about their bedtime. But yeah, the Invictus Games. So for your audience who maybe don't know what it is, if you imagine an event much like the Paralympics, same kind of sports, same kind of theme, multi-day, multi-sport event that takes place periodically every sort of 2 years-ish, give or take, in different countries around the world. The last one was in Canada, I think, which was February last year, I believe. And the next one is in Birmingham in England in July next year, I think, if memory serves me right. I'm not sure. But they do it. It's been going on for, I believe, 11 years now, something like that. And it was a brainchild of Prince Harry and I think a couple other guys as well. And the whole purpose of it is to support serving and ex-serving personnel from their respective countries who have ultimately found themselves on something called the WIS list, which is the wounded, injured and or sick list. And
Mm,
the key point there to note is that nobody joins the services to be on that list. It is not somewhere any of us want to be on. And that's ultimately why I got help from a few charities when I got out, particularly likes of Combat Stress, were from the Royal British Legion. PTSD was still problems. My injuries, my physical injuries caused me problems. And that's what led me to the Invictus Games. And I went there to get help with my recovery journey. And one of the things I liked is that there was no limit on what you could do, except it couldn't coincide at the games. You could do up to 4 sports as long as they didn't coincide. So you couldn't obviously compete in 2 at the same time. So you could try completely new things. So you didn't need to be like a, professional athlete in a particular thing in order to do it. You could try something from scratch. And away you go. But I went there with the full intent of milking the hell out of it. I just wanted to get as much as I could out of the experience and just, really try and get the help that I needed to get, first and foremost, my confidence and motivation back, but then get the help I needed with my injuries, And so I signed up to 4 different sports and swimming, every single one of the events I could do, even the ones I'm rubbish at, like backstroke. Oh, I hate that stroke, but I thought, let's do it. I did indoor rowing as well. I did powerlifting, which was the power lift, which is where you basically the bench press, but you get your legs strapped down, so it's kept relatively fair. And then the cycling. And I didn't have any real aspiration with it other than just to kind of make some progress with my recovery, if that makes sense. But yeah, that all got changed when I started, when I got my diagnosis, and after that came reared its head because, well, I kind of had to really. The doctors made no bones about the fact that if I'd not come in when I did, I may not have lasted more than another couple of days. Is the bottom line of that one? It was quite serious. So yeah, that's another part to the story. Another quite a step on. So I'll stop there and wait to see if you've got another question about the first bit.
Well, do they provide you support with the training for the events? Like, what is the process for signing up and then competing? Because not everybody understands what games are or how they are organized.
Okay, so when I first got introduced to it, I basically signed up to what they call the pre-selection camps. And they're a series of multi-sport training camps, basically for you to go and try different sports. And they did a whole series of them between, I think it was beginning of September through to the end of November in the 2022. So this is when I first got in. So this is within a year of me getting out. And you could go along to these and basically have a go at these different sports, ones that you've done before, or you try completely different things, anything from wheelchair basketball, sitting volleyball, cycling, swimming, athletics, all different kinds of things, the same sort of things you'd see at the Paralympics, to basically enable people with various kinds of impairments, both physical, both the seen and the unseen ones, and basically let them to do what they could and try different things within the limits of, of their physical and mental abilities, and it could literally be any range of impairments. I mean, there was guys there with absolutely severe PTSD where they needed someone to kind of help them, lead them in places when they had to wear the headsets and goggles and things to try and keep them zoned in because little things could send off triggers and things like that, So there was some guys there with real problems, but this gave them opportunity to try things again within a safe environment with the support of the appropriate medical staff and psychologists and things like that, people with experience working with the military and the ex-military and with these impairments. And dare I say it, they were able to try these things within a safe space and have a real go at it, knowing that they had that layer of protection, that bubble, if that makes sense, which is not something you can get just by tipping up at the local sports center or places like that, So each one of these camps, I think there was maybe about half a dozen or 8 of them between the September and November at different sites around England. So you could, still a challenge for me in Scotland because you're talking about 6, 7, 8 hours of driving to the nearest one, but it did offer more opportunity for more people to try them, because it was spread out around the country. So because if it was in one place, it'd be much more challenging, especially for those in wheelchairs or the more elaborate sort of physical support kit that they had, So they took them to like dedicated facilities. Like for example, the cycling, we went to a dedicated closed cycle racing circuit, if that makes sense. It was booked out for the day, and you got all people to come in and they could use the trikes and the various other sort of 3-wheeled and 4-wheeled sort of bikes and things, depending on the impairments. And then you could get obviously the guys on the normal upright bikes as well. So it was really good what they were putting on for people to try and have a go at. Anyway, roll the clock forward. So after the pre-selection camps, you could then, if you wanted to, you could apply to be a competitor. If you competed before, you could also apply to be an ambassador. If you'd got various qualifications and experience, you could apply to be a coach or assistant coach and so on, medical places and team support places and so on and so forth. So there was a range of opportunities to get involved in a nutshell. So you can be part of that sort of, you could be part of this whole entity that was being formed, if that makes sense. So it wasn't just about the competitors, it was the whole support bubble as well. So then, yeah, we submitted that application. And then in the January, you then found out, and it was quite a weird experience in that the email arrived, and I've seen obviously various security sensitive documents with various different bits and pieces all over it, telling you how sensitive this stuff was and off for their eyes only and this kind of stuff and whatever. But this thing, for the first time in my life, I've seen an email, big bold red letters across the top. It said embargoed. This, you're not to tell anyone beyond close family, all that stuff, which is surreal. Every communication we had up until they released the team list publicly, which I think was about 2 months or so, every single email had this big bold embargoed across the top. And yeah, it's quite an odd one. But the funny story there is I obviously told Steph, and my kids, or tried to kind of make them aware of what we were doing and the significance we were doing. My eldest was 3.5 or so by this point, give or take, I think 3.5, 4. My youngest was just turning 1. And I told my parents as well, because they live not far away from me as well. And my mum works, she's an instructor in the local college. Sure enough, I should have known this was going to happen, but sure enough, even though she knew not to, she goes and tells the flipping world, doesn't she? So, embargoed be damned, you know what I mean? She just went, so no, check out what my boy's doing, blah, blah, blah. And that was that. So yeah, thankfully in Northeast Scotland, that didn't get back down to the team. So I got away with it.
That's
so,
awesome.
Yeah. But yeah.
So you're training for this, right? You're chosen and whatever, and then you get diagnosed.
Yeah. It was, so in a nutshell, everything was going fine. And then I just started noticing things were a little bit off. So end of April at this point, I'd done various different training camps at this point, kind of like the same with the pre-selection ones. I just had dedicated camps for each sport kind of thing. You might have half a dozen different sports, but people would focus on the one they want to do, and they were all going fine. And I was making progress. I was enjoying it. And then beginning of May, I'd been watching my weight, and I knew I was 86.5 kilos because I was trying to lose a bit of weight and get down to competition weight. I'd gained a bit over the time I'd gone out, and, your usual stuff, eating crap, drinking stuff I shouldn't be drinking and so on. And I think, what was the first thing I noticed? So I started getting thirsty a bit more. So I was drinking more water. I was then getting up in the middle of the night once or twice to go to the toilet, which was unusual. And then I was starting to feel tired more. But then those seemed to all make logical sense. I was thirsty, so I was drinking more. I was going to the toilet more. I was getting up in the night, so I was tired more. There was a logical sense to these things. I was training hard again. I hadn't done it in a long time, but I was doing 2 a days on some days, so I just assumed my body was getting used to it all again, And I think the bit that started to scare me was after the first week into May, the weight was coming off me, and it was coming off me at a rate of knots that I wasn't used to. Now, to put this in, add a bit of context, I was, as a secondary role in the military, I was also what was called an all-arms physical training instructor. So my job essentially was to, well, dare I say it, beast the guys into the ground around the assault courses and carrying bergens and logs, usual sort of stuff. But I'd done various studies and research and training and coaching on nutrition and all that kind of stuff as well, how to train for various different kinds of events, from everything up to and including extreme endurance type stuff, the kind of things you'd expect military trainers to be able to do. And I've been doing it for the vast majority of my career. So dare I say it, I've probably forgotten more than what some of the basic PTs know nowadays, So bottom line, I knew what I was doing, but I couldn't explain why the weight was coming off so fast. I mean, I've eaten well before, I've trained with purpose before, made the benefits, seen the gains, all that stuff. I was eating 4,000 calories a day at this point, bear in mind. And the weight seemed to be coming off me by 1, even 2 kilos a day at sometimes. And I couldn't,
moly.
And this is why it was getting quite concerning, because I've seen maybe half a kilo now and again where something extreme's gone on. It's been a wet, hot day and I've sweated loads and, usual stuff. But yeah, within 2 weeks, I lost just over a quarter of my body weight. And most of it was this week when it really ramped up. So yeah, so that was why I called the doctors. I went from 86.5 kilos to just over 70, to put that in perspective. So yeah, I mean, definitely not right, but I couldn't explain it, I mean, I've read about diabetes in my textbooks and during my studies and things like that. When I studied for advanced diplomas in personal training and nutrition and stuff like that. It's in there, but in the military, you don't get exposed to those kinds of things. You don't see people with those kind of things, so you don't talk about it. You don't know anything about it, And dare I say it, most of my knowledge and understanding comes from experience rather than textbooks, because it's a personal trainer in Civvy Street is very different to a trainer in the military, So I went to the doctors, we did various tests, and on Friday, the 19th of May, 2023, so not really that long ago, it was my 3-year anniversary. That's when they told me that I had type 1 diabetes, and what I was suffering from, the symptoms, they were coming from something called diabetic ketoacidosis, which basically means that because my pancreas has stopped producing the insulin, basically it's they then said it, they think that I'd gone into honeymoon period earlier. And then, this was the point where it just decided, you can have it all, both barrels now. We're not giving you any more insulin. All the sugars that I was eating, all the carbohydrates, my stomach was digesting it. It was going into my bloodstream, and then it couldn't process it. So my body was being overloaded with sugar. But because it couldn't process it, it was pulling all the energy out of my muscles, and it was eating all my fat stores in a nutshell. And that's how it was providing the energy to my nervous system, my brain, for what I was trying to do to my body with all the training and that. So basically my body was eating itself from the inside out in a nutshell. And that's why I was losing all the weight. It all made sense to me really quickly when they told me that, but it didn't make it any more pleasant to hear it, And the bit that hit it home was, this was a Friday, and they said that if I hadn't come in when I did, then I may not have lasted the weekend. It was some of the worst numbers they'd seen, basically. So yeah, I kind of count my lucky stars that I got in when I did. It was one of them situations where I could have waited. I could have kept trying things myself and trying to figure out myself. But had I done that, then, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation now, So
no, not at all.
So, but yeah, the last, I don't remember much of the day of being diagnosed. I just remember being in the hospital for about better part of 3.5, 4 hours, because they were going through all the things I needed to know, how to work out the carbs in my food, how to calculate the insulin requirements, how to then inject it all, because I had to do it all myself, how to do the blood tests, how to sort of, work around like temperature, how to work around exercise, how to work around all these different factors that impact it. It's a lot to take
all in one day.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, they do a good job, don't get me wrong, but it was a bit of a blur. It really was. I do remember walking out around, I got there about, I think it was 8:30 or 9:00, and then I left around lunchtime, walked out of the hospital with like 2 great big shopping bags full of medical stuff, And I know my wife tried to sort of get me, in a better place. And we went and tried to add some food, and I tried to go through the process for the first time, conscious that I'm sticking needles in myself in a public place, thinking people are going to start asking questions or whatever, eyeballing me and whatever. But I don't remember much in the way of detail about that afternoon. One thing the doctors did say that I did remember quite clearly was that they'd wanted me to, they'd given me the sensible advice in a nutshell. They'd said that, look, I needed to consider dropping out of the games and focusing on my health. It was the right advice to give, obviously. My team manager had said the same thing, but I managed to get them to give me the weekend and just let me think about it and just say, look, because one of the other key differences with the Invictus Games to like the Paralympics and that is you can only compete twice in your lifetime. And the aim of that is basically allow them to catch up with all the other veterans that haven't had the chance yet, because it's only been going along for a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. So, because there's no age limit, you can, it's for anybody, any veteran, any serving personnel who finds himself in that situation. So I was kind of looking at this, weighing all this up, and I went, look, just let me have the weekend to look at all this situation, figure out what I need to do. And yeah, they agreed. But it took some doing, mind you, but yeah, they gave me the weekend, and I kind of just tried to live normally that afternoon and try to put it out of my mind. Very difficult to do, but I think it was the next morning that I really kind of had my moment where I had my first full night's sleep, because I had insulin in my system again. First full night's sleep in nearly 2 weeks, so I felt like $1 million.
I'm sure.
Yeah, even though I was still hanging out my ass, I was still literally looking like I was on death's door. I mean, I've seen a couple of photographs of the missus took back then, and you can see the bone structure around my shoulders, and you can see all the bones down my neck and everything. And I'm just looking at myself going, what? How did I think that was healthy when I looked at myself? How did I let it get to that point? It just seems
you never know when you're in it.
No, exactly. I mean, I was just doing the typical squatty thing. I was just trying to grizz it out. We're really bad for that. We just push through the pain and just, we'll just pop a few painkillers and crack on. This needs doing, that needs to happen. We need to make it work, and that's what I was trying to do. So I was still working. I was still functioning. I was still trying to train. I actually competed in a local event to try and get some experience the week before I got diagnosed as well. I was still trying to help my wife with the kids. It wasn't like I was holed up in bed. I was trying to do stuff. The funny thing was the doctors actually said they were amazed I was upright and talking to them with a smile on my face, let alone not keeled over on a hospital bed and, gibbering away. They were stunned at the numbers, because my blood sugars were crazy high. They were staggeringly high. But anyway, yeah, sorry. So the 20th, right? The 20th of May, that was the kind of day where I kind of snapped into my process. And I've had this kind of way of approaching challenges for a period of time whilst I was in the military. And bear in mind, the early part of my career, they teach us basic fault finding skills. As a communicator, that was one of the things we had to do, was fixing communication systems. And when I say basic, I mean really basic. So it started off with Is it plugged in the wall? Is it turned on at the wall? Is the other end plugged into the back of the set? Have you turned the radio set on? And that kind of level of basic. But then it built up from there, yeah? So I developed my own sort of way of approaching problems and challenges and things like that over time. And I just kind of snapped into it that morning. And I've learned to articulate it since. But at the time, I just kind of went through it, if that makes sense. Daft as that sounds. So the first step, so it's like a 5-step thing, right? The first step is to do something simple. And I got up that morning and I just went into the kitchen and I made myself a brew. And us Brits, we're infamous for making brews. That we usually break out the jet boil or the hexy stove or whatever. Out comes the boiler and off we go. We're getting our brews on the go. Whenever there's a pause in battle or whatever, So in there, making a cup of coffee, turn around and get those 2 shopping bags of stuff. And I just emptied them out on the kitchen table, right? And it genuinely covered the table. There was so much stuff. It was all my medication, all my spares packs, the monitors, the testing kit. It was nuts. The leaflets, the books. I mean, they really did set me up properly. They're really good like that. And they tried to explain all of it, but obviously it's a lot of information to take in one go. And the crazy part was I had to start trying to take 5 injections of insulin every day, but I had to calculate the insulin need as well, which meant trying to basically not kill myself with any one of these jabs. Because literally, if I got it wrong, if I took too much, it would, wouldn't have done me any favor.
You'll feel it.
Yeah, that's it.
Or maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as you go into pretty much a coma, start gibbering, and that's you. You're done. So, but yeah, it's because it's what's known as having a hypoglycemic effect, where it goes too low. And as I understand it, you start acting like you're drunk, and basically your brain's being sort of starved of all the bits it needs, really. But that's what can do you in quickly. So if I take too much insulin, that's what could happen. So the next step, really. So the first step is to do something simple. The second step, I like to say, give it a kiss, right? Because we all know that acronym, keep it super simple. I just think give it a kiss sounds better, But yeah, and that was my thing of laying out all the stuff on the table and just looking at what I needed to do first, what I must do. And that was to take the blood test, see what my blood glucose was first, then look at what I wanted to eat, work out the carb content of that, look at what my blood is now, and then what I wanted to eat, and then work out my medication from there. And I just worked through it step at a time like that. And I'm basically building a lot of that layer upon layer of understanding, if that makes sense. Because that ultimately is step 3 of 5, which is understanding. And when things go wrong, I don't believe that a perfect plan is the right way to go. I don't believe trying to generate a perfect plan is a good way to go. I don't think it's going to help me. I think it takes too long. I think by the time you've actually got it nailed down, too much has happened. And in this situation, I didn't have the time to get that level of understanding to be able to get the perfect plan. So I needed to move forward and start taking the medication and start getting it under control. So, but what I do believe, so I don't believe in a perfect plan. I believe that a reasonable plan will help weather the chaos. And I only need a level of understanding to create that plan, if that makes sense. So by keeping it really simple and building up those layers of understanding by doing what I need to do first and then next and so on, I can then allow those layers of understanding to compound over time, if that makes sense. So essentially, I'm investing my energy and focus over time to build up those layers of understanding and basically get a grip of it. You know what I mean? So the 4th step, however, is to embrace the change and the inevitable mistakes. And ultimately, that's what I was doing by taking those steps, by actually doing it. So doing the blood test, figuring out, how to do it all on my own without being supervised by the doctors. And then the next time was to do it more smoothly and do it quicker without having to mess around and so on. And just keep building on it, if that makes sense. But knowing that I'm doing something for the first time and like any human being, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. Not to beat myself up about it, but to use them as opportunities to learn and then to basically go into step 5, which is to learn, adapt, and then repeat. And that's it. That's the 5 steps. So it's do something simple, keep it simple, or give it a kiss, as I say, understanding, embrace the change and the mistakes, and then learn, adapt, repeat. And that's essentially what I started doing. But what that allowed me to get to, once I'd done my first blood test, worked out my insulin need, injected, waited my 15 minutes, which was enough time to have my brew and also let the insulin do its thing. Then I could eat my food. Once I'd done all that, lined everything up on the table to some semblance of an order, if that makes sense. I'm still not trying to learn this in depth, but it just kind of occurred to me with seeing all of this there, it was obvious just how much of a challenge this was going to be. I'd just done a few steps in this challenge, you know what I mean? I'd just done a few little things. I'd just done a blood test, I worked out my medication, eaten some food. That was it. But I could see this was going to be an absolute nightmare to try and learn. They've given me books about anxiety and depression as well, because that's closely linked with type 1 as well. They've given me, nutrition this and I don't know, different kind of medication. That there's two kinds of insulin to take as well, slow and fast acting. So that's another level of learning. Is the other one, the slow acting as well. Fast acting is for the food. Slow acting is against what your body's releasing over the whole day. So there's lots of learning to go into this. But it occurred to me that if I'm to get a grip of this challenge, then I need to set a goal to match it. So the significance of my goal has got to match the scale of my challenge. In a nutshell, that was kind of like an epiphany moment that just kind of hit us. And I realized that if I'm going to keep going for the games, it can't be about the recovery journey I was on. I needed to get a grip of this one. And with how much pain it was going to cause me, because I knew that my blood sugars were going to change like on a dime with all the training, with all the high calorie intake, all the nif naff and trivia that comes with it all. There was going to need a lot more blood tests than what I was being asked to do. So I'd have to do normally, a normal type 1 diabetic has to do 4 blood tests a day, 1 before each meal and 1 before bed, and then 5 injections of insulin based on those blood tests and what they're going to eat. So that's 9 needles every single day. That's a normal type 1. That's what we're supposed to do, right? But with the rate of change in my blood sugars, I knew that the number was going to have to increase, right? I didn't know how much at this point, on that day, the morning of the 20th, but I knew it was going to be hard. So that was the moment where I said to myself, right, we have to park the recovery journey I was on, and I need to focus on the new one. And I need a goal that's going to keep me focused on that journey. This is going to be the most significant challenge I've ever faced, both physically and mentally. It's going to hurt. So I've got to aim for something that's way up there. And that was the kind of moment that morning, the Saturday, the 20th of May, quite literally less than 24 hours after I was diagnosed. That was the point where I went, right, it is a top spot, or simply I'm not going. It's got to be go big or not go at all. So it's gold medal or nothing. Simple as that. And that was the moment where I went, I'm doing, that's what I'm doing. And I was out on the bike again the following morning once I'd sort of got a bit of a grip of things, if that makes sense, just to go and test and see how I felt over a mile, and I just carried on building it from there. So on the Monday, when I went back to the doctors after the weekend, I told him this. He was like, "You're an idiot going back on the bike this quickly." What? But I explained everything to him, showed him what I'd been doing, how I'd been doing it. And he was just like, "Well, we can't fault your logic. Where you're going to be training within these closed circuits, within these environments, with all these medical staff and so on, it's the safest place to do it. I mean, the alternative would have been to do it in my garage, with my own kit. But that was early days. I knew it was going to hurt, but I didn't know how much. But 5 weeks later, I got a real understanding of how much pain it was going to be, because bear in mind, I'd said on day one, I was being asked to do what every type 1 diabetic has to do to start with, and that's 9 needles a day, 4 tests, 5 injections. Yeah. By week 5, the most recorded needles I took in one day was 43 in total. That doesn't include all the mistakes, because when you're in the swimming pool and you get out and you jump out and your hands are wet, trying to do a blood test, it can be quite tricky. So you can jab yourself, put the reader on, and it won't read it because it's too diluted or whatever. Same principle with the bike in the heat when you're sweating and you got all the grit in your fingers. Trying to do this quickly while you're hyped up and that as well, it's very easy to make mistakes, and I did make a lot of those. So it was probably a lot more than that, but that was the recorded number, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I was literally a human pincushion, quite literally. So I think it was every 15 minutes or something like that for an entire day was the rough average time frame between jabs. So, but to be fair, the hospital recognized this. They recognized that the rate of learning I was doing was surpassing what they could support me with, and they fast tracked me to get one of these.
So he's pointing to a monitor, because I'm sure there's some people out there that are like, why didn't they give him a monitor?
Yeah.
And I can tell you that when you're first diagnosed, because you're so unstable, they can't give you a monitor. You can't wear a pump, all that stuff, because everybody needs to figure out what your body is doing first and how your body reacts to heat, food, stress, all the things. And once you get that dialed in and the medical community sees progress, which is not crazy highs, not crazy lows, and just a nice little wavy line through your day, then that will help you. But yeah, the having the is continuous blood glucose monitor on your arm is a fantastic piece of technology for a lot of people that I know, because it really just gives you that, it just cuts down on sticking yourself. And, for those old school people who have no feeling in their fingertips because they've poked every dang fingertip multiple times a day, just to figure out what their body's doing, it's nice to, just have that monitor on you and get a little warning signal off your phone, as opposed to, carrying all the stuff that goes along with sticking your stuff and buying strips and all the things that are super expensive. Diabetes is not cheap.
No.
And
Right.
especially when you're figuring it out, and I know that not everybody has access to the benefits to getting those things purchased, and
Mhm.
some people have to pay out of pocket, and some people do crazy stuff to make sure they have insulin, but it's to get it dialed in that first few years is kinda crazy, and as a teacher, I've seen students that have, bottomed out and ended up in the hospital and have had spend multiple weeks in the hospital until they got everything under control before they
Mhm.
can even go home because they were a danger to die.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we take for granted that it's like everybody has it, so we're like, "Oh, it's just a common thing to have diabetes," and it's like, yeah, but it's still life-threatening.
Mhm. Indeed. I mean, like you said there, it was that getting that monitor, it was quite literally night and day. One day I'm taking stupid amount of needles every day. Next day, I'm literally doing 6 in a day. One was a confirmatory test just to make sure it was all calibrated. The other 5 were
Mhm.
injections, and that was it. And it was quite a difference. The main benefit I found was that instead of reactively managing the condition, seeing the number on the meter after I'd done the blood test and then having to figure out what I was going to do next, whether it was eat more, train more, do whatever, and so on. I could, the key difference is the monitor, it tests every 5 minutes, right? Um, and the benefit there is that I can see the direction my blood sugars are going because it's testing so often. So what that meant is that I could proactively manage my condition rather than reactively. Um, so I could react to the trend, the direction it was going, rather than waiting for the moment to hit, if that makes sense. So that changed the way I was training like overnight. It was amazing that my confidence just went through the roof after that. Within about 2 weeks of that, I was really making some serious progress. Still way off what I was prior to getting ill, but
Mhm.
it just felt so much better being able to feeling like I could make some progress because the one thing I found difficult to deal with was having to stop or take a break, because my blood sugars have gone too low or too high. And I'm like, I feel fine. But, you know, if you're training with them too high, that can do damage to your inside, but if you're training with them too low, that's when it get really dangerous, especially if you're on a bike at speed or if you're in the pool.
Right. Pass
So
out and crash.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. That's not something I really want to do. The body does not do well against concrete. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
So,
So you compete in the Invictus game, you win a gold medal. How does the winning and sharing that moment with your family, how does that kinda, I guess, put like an exclamation point on the craziness that your life had been for the year and a half before that?
well, it taught me a really valuable lesson, if I'm honest. I mean, I'd already sort of got a real hard lesson with the medical discharge around the difference of responsibility and accountability, and ultimately, I had to be more accountable of what was going on. But what that condition taught me, and ultimately what the results that I got from the Invictus Games taught me, is that, well, as the poster behind me says, as I am the master of my own fate. I can't help the challenges that might come across my path, but I can determine how I'm going to respond to them. And ultimately, as if I embrace that, then I can turn that into success. And that is something I've since found out is called prosilience. So it's like a step above resilience, if that makes sense, where resilience allows you to absorb a challenge into your normal routine and allows you to continue on your, holding your line. Prosilience is about deliberately targeting that adversity with the intent to turn it into success. Essentially, instead of holding the line, you're raising the bar in a nutshell, and you're becoming a better person as a direct result of it, deliberately setting out to be better for it, if that makes sense. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but I since learned that, in terms of, having had time to reflect and look at this from just trying to really sort of see how I did it. Because one thing I found when I came back, so what we're doing right now with it, having this conversation and the conversations I've had previously and the keynote speaking and such like, this only came about because I'd been given what's called a talented athlete pass by my local council. So that because I was representing the country with the aim of them helping me financially to train and prepare, I was given a pass to be able to go and use the local gyms and such like and the pools, in my area. And in return, I did little PR events for them, and it was just to make up for that. And one of them when after I got back from the Invictus Games was to go and do a talk for the kids in my local primary school. And we're talking age range of between 5 years old and maybe 10 or 11, 12 years old, maybe. And not having a clue really what I was doing. I mean, I've done plenty of speaking in the military, but it's quite a different thing talking to and give barking orders and whatever to talking to a bunch of young kids and trying to keep them entertained. I'm
Mhm.
it's quite
And they're honest.
That's it. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And stupidly, I went and did what I thought I knew was the right thing to do, which was to go and create a PowerPoint slide. I thought I'll bung a few bits here and things like that. I realized very quickly, no, they don't want that. They don't want that at
No,
all.
they don't care about PowerPoints.
Not at all. I did bring a loads of bits and pieces, military memorabilia, obviously my medal, and a few other bits and pieces. And within about 30 seconds, the first hand goes up, and then another one, and then all of the hands are up, and then that's it. It's bombarded with questions. But it went really well. So they brought out a number of classes at a time, if that makes sense. I was in there for about 2 hours. I think we did 3 or 4 waves of classes, if that makes sense. The first one went, as you'd expect, I was like massive learning curve going, right, how do I stem the tide, And then the second and third, it got easier because I knew what to expect, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But I felt better at the end of it. But one thing I really took away from it was that they wanted to know about the things I've been doing. They wanted to hear the stories. They wanted to know, what did you get that badge for? Why did you have this? What did you do to get that medal? What's that thing on your bike? They wanted to hear all this stuff, and it taught me a really valuable lesson about the value in my experience and the impact that it can have if I talk to people about it. So, but I didn't set out to do anything more with it than that. But my reputation that's when it started. Another school heard about it, and then another one, and then another one. And, you roll the clock forward 6 months. I've been pinged for an award in my local region. And whilst there, they read out the testimonial because I was fortunate enough to win it. It's one of I think it's that one, the shiny thing there behind me in my head. They read out the testimonial, and the main sponsors were it was a dinner night, and we're all dicky bowed up and so on. And the main sponsors were sat there at the table, and we were chatting and talking. They heard the testimonial. They were asking me questions about some of the things they'd heard, and we were chatting for a bit. And then they stopped at a certain point and they said, "You clearly got some stories here we want to hear about, and you like talking to people. So why don't you get into motivational speaking? It's like the Joker said in that Batman movie, if you're good at something, don't do it for free." And I was like, well, can't really fault that logic, So that was the 15th of March, 2024. On the 16th of March, obviously, once I'd gotten over my fuzzy head from the few wines the night before, I Googled how to start a business and how to register a company. And that's kind of how it started. And I got into talking and trying to really think about what I'd been doing and how I did it. And like I said, I've learned to articulate my processes and my way of thinking. And I've started with the deliberate aim to try and help other people develop their resilience and overcome life's challenges. The line is to motivate and inspire people to adapt to life's challenges, to get MIA'd, get motivated, get inspired, get adapted. If you struggle with any one of those, come and see me. That's the line. So it's there's a little military bit in there as well, you see. But yeah, it's still a learning curve, but it was because of those kids how it started. Basically, it was not something that I had a real aspiration to do or even considered could be a career path, if that makes sense. I mean, I still do my project management stuff. I really thoroughly enjoy it, but I like helping people more, if that makes sense. It's something that it's.
Oh, yeah.
I can't really put a thing on it. I just have this, if someone comes to ask for help, I'll find a way to make time to do it, if that makes sense. And I seem to have a knack for my approach to challenges and how I see things. And yeah, dare I say, I can't say as I get it right every time, but I'll find a way forward somehow eventually.
It works always. Well, David, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. If somebody were to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
So the easiest way will be through my website, speakingsbc.com. Links to my various social channels are on there. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn are the two main ones, really. But yeah.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.